Welcome back to the Manor. Julian McBain here, and today I want to talk about a topic that's been pretty hot on the internet. We into all kinds of commentary from left-wingers and right-wingers and center-wingers and libertarians and, actual fucking communists. So we're going to talk about Helldivers and whether or not SuperEarth is a fascist government. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Manor. Please take a moment and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Alright, so is the government of SuperEarth a fascist state? And that gets very, very complicated very, very quickly because we don't know. They're definitely nationalist, and nationalism is a hallmark of fascism, but not all nationalists are fascists, which in our current political discourse tends to get very, very muddied, because basically these days anyone that does something I don't like as a fascist is pretty much the going rhetoric. But I think to really understand whether or not SuperEarth is a fascist state, we actually need to break down what fascism is. And so I'm going to use my knowledge about the topic, but I'm also going to use some source material because I've actually studied fascism. I've studied communism, particularly the differences between Soviet communism and Maoist communism. And I've studied the various forms of government that have existed in the world, from different types of monarchy to our current constitutional, presidential, federative republic that we have here in the United States, which that's what it's supposed to be, but it's closer to an imperial republic now. So let's get into it. First off, let's take a look at what the actual definition of fascism is. And to do that, we're actually going to take Benito Mussolini's definition of fascism. Let's see. Yeah, I know that. There used to be Google's changed shit so that because it was telling them stuff that they didn't like. Let's take a look here. So basically it's that the state is all encompassing. There was a better synopsis of something that he had, and I can't find it now, but the fascist conception of the state is all embracing. Outside of it, no human or spiritual values can exist, much less have value. Thus understood, fascism is a totalitarian in the fascist state, a synthesis and a unit of inclusive of all values, interprets, develops, and potentiates the whole life of a people. So effectively, it was meant to replace religion with government. And it's because of its relation to communism, and a lot of people don't like hearing, especially people who are avowed communists or socialists, don't like the fact that fascism was actually born from Marxist theory. But what happened was Giovanni Gentile, who was a powerful minister in Mussolini's government, and he was really the brain behind Italian fascism. Everyone gives the credit to Mussolini and Hitler, but realistically, neither of them were responsible. Giovanni Gentile was the real philosopher behind it all. The idea was, well, instead of promoting class warfare, which is what Marxist theory was, where you had the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, instead we would unite the proletariat and bourgeoisie in order to produce for the state, and then the state could accomplish its goals. And as long as the state accomplished its goals, then the people could receive the benefits of what the state could produce. This is how the German war machine, because Nazism is an extension of fascism, it's frankly, as a governing system, economically it worked even better than Italy's version of it, but from a socio-governmental perspective, it was a messy amalgamation of both fascism and what we would now call democratic socialism. And I know a lot of people would think, well, there's no democracy in a fascist state, and that's not entirely accurate. Fascism is actually exactly what they call it in Helldivers. It's managed democracy. You have a bureaucratic state you do have people that can vote for their for their representatives, usually locally or even in the whatever parliamentary system they have. So like it was the Reichstag in Germany, or I don't know what they call it in Italy. I think it was the Chamber of Deputies. I'm probably misremembering that, but I don't have resources in front of me. And so they were elected there. So basically what it was is it was democracy that was managed by a bureaucratic state or executive, which probably sounds really familiar to Americans right now because, yes, that's exactly what we live under now. We live under managed democracy. Now, why is it we don't call America a fascist state as opposed to, say, 1930s Italy? Because there is a piece missing from the American system that prevents it from being a truly fascist state, although in recent years there have been a couple attempts to push us in that direction. See, fascism on its own is the lucrative merger of corporation and state, which means the government encourages corporations to implement things in policies that the government doesn't have the right to implement. For instance, requirements in order to work at a company, or programs in order to make sure that people that are desirable to the state get hired and those that aren't desirable to the state do not. A good example of this is the ESG targets that have been produced by BlackRock, because the U.S. government cannot force these goals down on companies. Instead, they use environmental social governance in order to produce results that the state cannot compel, but instead forcibly encourage, because ESG scores are basically like credit scores. So that's kind of like a very rudimentary form, moving from the managed bureaucratic democracy that we have in America toward a more true fascism. Although the OSHA rule back in 2021 was another good example where the executive tried passing a rule that was unconstitutional to force people to get a product from a company, and as it happened, that company was also the biggest. The three companies that produced it were the first, second, and fourth biggest donors to the winning party. So those are the types of things that create this notion of fascism. And I provided you examples where, again, we aren't an actual fascist state in the United States. We've been finding our managed democracy to be quite adjacent, which is probably why this triggers a lot of people. So what is it that causes this to be the case? And the reason why is because in the past, fascist states valued certain things. They were really good at propaganda. And they were really good at propaganda because they needed the propaganda in order to survive. Okay? You don't get out of things when you're a basic dictatorship. And if you need propaganda to survive, that makes it a lot tougher unless you have an expert propagandist. A good example of this would have been Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels would watch this and probably cheer about how all of his theory was used in order to make this video game. However, that is not entirely the case, because Joseph Goebbels was not the progenitor of this theory. In reality, he learned from Edward Bernays, and he would admit to that, by the way, if he was still alive. Instead, he got executed because he deserved... Actually, no, I think he committed suicide. But either way, let's double check that. Let's see. Let's look up one of the biggest assholes on the planet. No, he committed suicide. Oh yeah, wasn't it him who he killed like all 8 of his children? Yeah, because he was the chancellor. Blah 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 blah. Yep, he committed suicide. Just wanted to verify that. I hate not double checking facts on shit that I've spent 12 years studying. So a lot of the practices that Goebbels refined off Bernays' initial work. By the way, you can pick up Bernays' book on propaganda off of Google Books for free. I encourage you to do so. Read that shit. Okay? Read that shit. You need to know what in your life is propaganda. I'm working on it. I will admit it's kind of a dry read. But it's worth it. So, So in the end, the question is SuperEarth a fascist state? And the answer is we have no way of telling. The propaganda is fantastic, very reminiscent of fascist or governments in the past. And they really promote like the quintessential have a family, have kids, very clean and pristine. I know the podcast of the Lotus Eaters heavily criticized calling it fascist because it was very ethnically diverse. But fascism isn't necessarily racist, and that's something that a lot of people miss. Spain, very much a majority Hispanic location, definitely not Aryan, fascist state for a long time, second only to Italy. And it was the only fascist state to survive World War II until the kingdom was actually restored much later. So this is where like all of these misinterpretations can come. So what you need to do is, what's the economic background of this culture? We don't know very well. We do know that you have to buy into a lot of shit, which means a lot of the money you make goes straight back into the government or whatever super corporation you work for. That does speak to a fascist state, because in a fascist state, you build corporations, and we're not necessarily talking businesses, bodies corporate that control various aspects. So you'd have a corporation that's responsible for the roads. You'd have a corporation responsible for the town. You'd have a corporation that's responsible for policing. That's the way that stuff worked. And so, and I'm oversimplifying it because it's a lot more complex than that. But the fact that you pay for like a lot of stuff in this game, not just you, but if you talk to the people on your ship, that's what they do, speaks to the possibility of it being an actual fascist state. And the propaganda, like always talking about democracy, bringing managed democracy to the galaxy, sounds a lot like the vote for us and defend democracy, or if you vote against us, you're voting against democracy. Very, very similar to that type of rhetoric that we hear in the news a lot from both sides of the political aisle. So it's very interesting that they'd incorporate all that, because I can't tell whether the developer is doing it on purpose or if they just wanted to be like, do the Starship Troopers thing. Because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of the Starship Troopers thing in this, right? It's evoked so many memes from Starship Troopers that it came back. But Arrowhead really did a great job with the way that they put this whole thing together. And I think that if I had to make a guess, in all likelihood, if it is not a fascist state, it's a proto-fascist state, which means that it incorporates a lot of elements of fascism because of the situation. Now, is this what it would be like when they're not at war? Assuming they're ever not at war? It's possible it wouldn't. It's entirely possible that managed democracy, when, you're not having to throw helldivers at things that, like cannon fodder, is far more peaceful and far less of an issue. Maybe they don't flog people in the streets for transgressions. Maybe they don't execute people for misspeaking or for speaking out against their government. We don't know if there's a constitution. We don't know any of the laws or rules. We just know that there are bugs, go shoot them. There are robots, go shoot them harder. That's all we know about it. So we don't have, while there's a lot of the allegories to that, I would have to say that we need more information. And unless Arrowhead comes out and specifically tells us, or even better, what the hell is his name? The CEO, who's always on frickin' Twitter. And now I gotta find his name because it's gonna bug the shit out of me until I find it. Except Twitter, of course, today is alight with all kinds of nonsense regarding the Supreme Court ruling that just happened. Which means I can't find shit on video games at the moment. Arrowhead. Helldivers, blah, blah, blah. Give me the CEOs. There it is. Pielstedt. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, by the way, Pielstedt. And if I'm mispronouncing it, please get in the comments and correct me with a pronunciation guide. Because, dude, your entire studio deserves the most credit This might go. This is definitely going to be in the top 5 games of the year. If it's not game of the year, the reason it won't be game of the year is probably because Pal World is. So I've got to applaud you. But if you could provide us like some more insight, that'd be great. But more importantly, I just want to like praise and applaud all the work you did. So there, my little video essay on whether or not this is fascism. Again, I'm going to say the conclusion is insufficient information. I am going to push back on the podcast of the Lotus Eaters on this one, and I'm sorry, Carl. I think you're incorrect. I think that in all likelihood, this is a fascist state. I do think there's insufficient information, but we're not talking about like a Mussolinian fascist state. We're talking more of like a Gentile-styled contemporary one where they're not trying to be super oppressive, which you'd think that fascism by its nature is, but it actually doesn't have to be. And I'm not praising fascism because, quite frankly, there's like half a dozen better systems. Anarcho-capitalism is better than fascism. What it is, though, is hyper-efficient. And you do have to give them that. And so in a state of war, I mean, that's basically what a state is under martial law. So that give the devil his due. It is a very efficient system for when you're at war. So that's why I would lean toward that. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. And as always, I really appreciate the support, and we'll see you in the next one.